So we're back. It's been a while, Mitch. It's good to see your face.
It's been a while. I feel like that's a music cue. We should do Dukes of Hazzard's the musical.
Hello. Can we just sing Adele the whole?
Is it me you're looking for?
I feel like we'll get no listeners if we sing. We have to not sing and not eat on the mic.
Could we rap, though? Could we do like Hamilton?
I mean, I can rap. I don't know if you can.
You're right. I can't rap.
I can Christian rap. I bet I can only Christian rap. So everything has to rhyme with Jesus.
There's not a lot that Jesus. Luckily, you got Jesus.
I know.
You and Kanye.
I told him that.
You know what? I wanted to tell you something. I'm gonna pimp myself a little bit. I'm going. Jordan and I are hosting Outbreak, the movie, at her college. Manhattan College in the Bronx is showing Outbreak.
Manhattan College, go Tigers!
That's right.
I don't know.
I don't think they're actually. That's not what they're called. But they're showing the movie Outbreak, and we're doing a talk after it on March 3rd. So people could come out and we'll talk about Dustin Hoffman.
You should tweet that junk out, and maybe we'll show up.
Use that. That sounds awesome.
That would be really fun to come to. But it's been a while since should we run down the things that have happened since we've met last? We've had the Zika virus.
It's a little grim. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about Zika at the end, but we've also had this rash of tragedies.
Mitch has had a rash.
No, look, man, I'm trying to change.
It's all over his
here.
face. It's really gross.
I had a segue.
I'm sorry,
but we've had, Paris, Colorado Springs, San Bernardino. I mean, we've had all of these multiple casualty incidents, that have been happening.
We've had snowstorms.
That's right. We've had major snowstorms. We have had. What else? Multiple drone attacks. I'm just going to say we're prescient. We predicted drones would take over the world, and now they're
and they really have.
Running into buildings. They ran into the White House. They ran into the Empire
State Building recently.
All over the place.
They're even having. I read recently they're going to start having drone races, which I think would be pretty cool.
We're going to sponsor a drone. If anybody out there, it's going to be like NASCAR. You could have the Dukes of Hazzard's drone all to yourself.
That's right. So for our first episode back, we're going to talk today pretty much the whole time about active shooter events. And this is because they've been in the news, unfortunately, a lot lately. We've also got quite a few listener questions about them. So we're going to talk about a couple of them today.
Yeah, one of them was from my bud Conrad Oakey. Shout out, Conrad. And he says, I'm wondering if your podcast might focus on how police and the general population respond to events like those in Paris. How's the tactical situation addressed? What are smart things to do as a citizen? Since that's in the news. And I really do think, to kind of cue up your question, that this is a real sea change for emergency management, right? This kind of combination of security things is really different than the natural disaster stuff we've talked about or the health and medical stuff we've talked about.
Yeah, it's like the planning for these has really come from the tactical level up to the strategic level. It's it seems like the tactics for this is pretty clear with run, hide, and fight back, but the emergency management of these types of incidents is I haven't seen a lot out there on that. So fortunately we have a very special guest today who can talk about those sort of things. And just a little bit of intro. So Suzanne Blake, sorry, I know her as Susie Blake.
I know her as Suzanne Blake.
So
we're just going to alternate.
So we're just going to switch back and forth. Suzanne and I it was my first job out of college. I believe it was Suzanne's too.
Is this going to be your life story?
Yeah. It was yours, Susie?
It was, yeah. It was my very first job out of college.
Like young, dumb, living Washington, D.C., for not knowing anything. We both worked for a company called SRA, which I don't think is around any longer. I think they got bought out by someone. And we were like young and in the field doing emergency management. And a few months after I started, 9/11 happened, and that's where discipline of emergency management really went crazy. But let me give a little bit of intro to Susie and tell you about her and why she's an expert in active shooters. So Susie's a certified emergency manager, has over 14 years of experience in emergency management. She worked for years for Witt O'Brien's, which is a major emergency management consulting firm. And she currently works at MIT, which is really cool. She's the emergency manager for MIT. She has, before that, she was at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, where she ran the emergency management program. She's got a BA from Georgetown and a master's in environmental management from Duke University. She surfs. She has a dog. She drives an SUV.
All at the same time?
All at the same time, baby. Wow. It's Susie Blake. Susie, welcome.
Woo.
Susie, are you there? Did you? Oh,
I don't know.
Did you cut her off?
Is she really gone? Wow, that's actually never happened before.
That's really funny.
We're still on the line with her.
Oh, Susie,
are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, there we go.
Nice. What happened?
I don't know.
Could you not hear us?
No, I heard. The last thing I heard was surfs and drives an SUV.
Okay.
Wow. Okay.
I also said you had a dog.
That's right.
Yes, I actually drive a hybrid now, not an SUV anymore.
Oh, see, that's better for the environment.
Things
have
changed in the last 12 years.
So, we really do want to dig into this active shooter thing, and I guess I want to set it up a little bit. We talked about the ones that have happened recently, but I know that you in particular have expertise in higher education, and I was looking at kind of the things that have happened in the last few years, and I guess I didn't actually realize how common these things were. So I was looking at this study that the FBI did with Texas State about active shooter incidents from 2000 to 2013, and there were hundreds of them during this time. There's an average of like 12 annually, and they've led to even in that time period more than 1,000 casualties. Most of them end before police arrive, which I didn't realize, and more than 13% of them end only when unarmed citizens themselves restrain the shooter. I mean, this is kind of an amazing set of statistics to me. Is this a growing problem in the country?
That's the golden question, I think. And I know the study you're talking about, and a quarter of those happen in higher education or K through 12 setting, which is where I have focused on. But yeah, I think it's not becoming more frequent. It's something that we definitely hear more about because it is such a media catcher now. And that's why a lot of the programs have come out as far as, how you can respond and how you can prepare. And like you said, I mean, these the actual incidents, and from the same report, the actual incidents only last on average from 8 to 12 minutes, and most of them end even before law enforcement arrives. Wow. So it's really, that's why we've had to build these whole programs around what the individual can do, and then also what happens in the aftermath, because there's a lot of traumatic things happening there and a lot of emergency management that you have to do in the aftermath as well.
So could you talk about how are active shooter events different than kind of the more traditional hazards that emergency managers deal with? What makes these, other than just the emotional aspect of them, what makes these unique hazards?
Well, I think exactly what you just said is the emotional aspect of it, and also what we were referring to before, that the actual hazard is so short in duration, and then it's really what maybe you'd call the crisis management afterwards that you're dealing with the most. The actual incident lasts for minutes, but the effects of that can last for days, weeks, months, even years or decades. And, some of the places that have had these types of incidents are still known for that. Columbine, we still think of that. Virginia Tech, we think of that. So it's this very long duration recovery and crisis management that you have to deal with in the aftermath. I think also it's, very visceral because it's a human caused threat, and those are always a little bit more emotional, but it's something that you don't want to think about. And I think in the past few years, we've had to really engage the public in, recognizing that this can happen. It is a threat. There's a lot of prevention and preparedness you can do for them, but also if it does happen, you have to realize that it can happen and be prepared to deal with it and have tools yourself as an individual and as an organization or institution or wherever you are to deal with them as well.
Well, let's break that apart a little bit, and focusing on the strategic stuff, less the tactical stuff, since we're not law enforcement professionals. But maybe let's look at the individual side of that first, and the individual tools that you need and that we need to instill in people. One of the things that I've seen about Virginia Tech, and one thing that's said about the World Trade Center bombings too, is that in the World Trade Center, the people that were nearest the explosion evacuated more slowly, actually, because they sort of didn't believe it was happening. And in Virginia Tech, people were really slow to evacuate for the same reason, because there was this sort of frozen response where people are trying to orient. Like, what goes on in a person's mind when they start hearing something like gunfire?
Yeah, that's interesting too. And I think that's exactly part of the training, is that you want, everyone has heard about active shooters and active shooter incidents, and it's kind of on everyone's mind these days, but are you really going to recognize it? And when it is happening close to you, are you going to be able to get out of, I've heard some practitioners call it the basement, and your mind goes into the basement, and some of the folks who study it at Harvard, they kind of call it that. Can you get your mind out of the basement, and can you be alert and oriented and realize that you do have choices in how you can respond to this, and you can do something to kind of save yourself from it? And then also knowing where to get more information if you really just don't know what to do on your own. But that whole being alert, pulling yourself out of the basement, I think comes with the preparedness and the training ahead of time. And luckily, a lot of the preparedness that you do for an active shooter incident is the same that you would do for any hazard. But of course, there's going to be specifics, just like with any hazard. So you want to make sure people are very well aware of the options that they have, and that they do have options when they're faced with something like this.
So what are those options, and how do we get people to understand that?
So we were talking a little bit before we started recording. Of course, the big one right now is Run, Hide, Fight, and there's been a lot of effort to promote that across the country, and the great video that came out of Texas. I think when it came out, it was a lot of us grasped onto it because there wasn't anything concrete, and so it was really great to have something that we could use, and we could tell people this is kind of what you do in an active shooter incident. I think now we're in the evolution of looking at it and questioning it and saying, is this the best thing for my specific place, my specific area, my workplace, my school, whatever it may be? And just like in anything in emergency management, the great thing is that it's adaptable. So, for example, the UK has taken Run, Hide, Fight, and they call it Run, Hide, Tell, because they don't want to promote the fighting part of it. They want to promote calling, law enforcement and emergency services. So I think it's nice that you can take it and kind of adapt it to what you need. A lot of higher eds are actually making really great videos that are very specific to their campuses and sort of the classroom environment, the laboratory environment, the office environment, anything you might face on a college campus. There's also another program called ALICE that a lot of law enforcement officials are being trained in, and a lot of us are kind of learning about, and it's alert, lockdown, inform, counter, evacuate. So there, the counter is, they don't want to necessarily promote fighting an active shooter, but they want you to kind of counter them with noise and, moving around rapidly and doing things that are going to distract them and reduce the shooter's ability to shoot accurately, basically. So, but I think the point is with any of these tactics is that you have options, and that you need to be smart about it and know that you have options and know kind of the different situations you could be put in. I mean, you could be at a workplace or at a college campus, and the active shooter incident could be happening on the complete other side of your area and your geographic area where you are. So you want to know what you would do in that situation. You also want to know what you would do if you actually heard the gunshots. And the point, again, is that you have these options, and that you can employ different things depending on what your situation is, and that you do have to be alert and oriented and kind of with it and know what is happening and know the things that you can do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Another unique aspect of this hazard is, like, more than any other disaster that I haven't been through an active shooter event, but I've been through other disasters. More than any other disaster, this disaster has caused me to day think of, when I am in large crowds, when I am in big, meetings, to think, what would I do if someone came in the room, if someone comes in this way, would I go this way? It's and I'm not the only one. I know other people that I talk to, even that are not in emergency management, have this same thing. They're on the subway. They're thinking, man, if something happened now, how would I react? And that is a unique aspect of this.
And is that something? So I've heard two strains of thoughts on this, and one is that is anxiety producing, right? That keeps us all in the state of high alert. But the other is also that it's helpful because what we're doing is we are rehearsing, and when you rehearse that stuff in your brain, you're more likely to be able to make the right choice at the time. Do you know sort of whether that kind of behavior is helpful when incidents actually happen?
That's interesting. I actually went to a training yesterday about suicide and learning the signs for that. And I kind of asked the same question about, if you're talking to someone who you think is having these problems and is potentially suicidal, and you ask them, are you thinking of committing suicide? Are they going to say, oh, no, I wasn't, but now that's giving me the idea that I could? And they quickly said, no, there's much more evidence that it helps if you're actually thinking about it and you're mentioning it rather than not. And so I think the same thing can be applied here. I think the more it's rehearsed in your brain, the more you're not going to be as freaked out when something happens, and that you are going to remember your options, and training. And we as emergency managers know that too, that you can, the more you train and the more you stumble ahead of time, the better you're going to be when it actually happens. So I think that with all these incidents in the media all the time, it is anxiety producing just as being a human being on this planet right now. But I think the more resources you have, the better, and that you can respond to it.
Seriously, what about this life is not anxiety producing? Everything I do every day produces anxiety.
It's a problem.
No, and
one more thing. It's an election.
You're right. Like, as an emergency manager, I walk into a place and I'm like, well, this place sucks for an active shooter. There's glass everywhere. Like, where are you going to go? I mean, that's the first thing I think when I walk into different office buildings. I went to a tech company here in Cambridge the other day, and the entire place was just glass walls. I was like, oh gosh, this is terrible.
That's actually
I think, the other side of that is that, of course, we're always going to be in different locations. We're going to be on the subway. We're going to be walking around in different areas. But the places that you are hanging out the most, if you can get specific active shooter training for those places and engage your local law enforcement and have them come in and talk to you about it and tell them, what they think you should do, and, those kinds of things specific for your workplace or for whatever environment you're mostly in, I think that's really helpful as well. And that can, lessen the anxiety quite a bit.
So, I was actually reading in my cubicle farm office surrounded by glass walls, the Interagency Security Committee Policy and Best Practices Guide to Planning and Response to an Active Shooter. And I was basically thinking how I was going to die. I know. Come on. No, it's the hottest seller right now. But so I just want to sort of pick on Run, Hide, Fight. And I want to say a couple things. First of all, Please never compliment Texas while you're talking to Andrew.
Sorry, I know.
I was doing
I
was doing air fist jabs as you said Texas.
I did that especially for you.
Thank you.
And I do think Run, Hide, Fight is so Texas, and Run, Hide, Tell is so England.
I know.
I'm surprised the Texas guidance isn't just fight, or like shoot, fight.
Yeah.
So what because I've done this too. So in the trainings for Run, Hide, Fight, that first time when you mention fight as a strategy, it does provoke this visceral sort of reaction among people. And I know you've trained this, and so I guess I wonder if you could dig into your thoughts about these different strategies and what you think about them. And I want to say this about Alice, which is that there are too many words in that acronym, and I can't remember what they are.
Yeah, what are they again? Awareness? No.
Lockdown, ice.
What's the A?
Alert,
icing,
lockdown, inform, counter, evacuate. Yeah.
Alert, lockdown, inform,
counter, evacuate.
Counter terror?
I think though, if we could combine them and run, hide, counter, or something like that. So
Rick.
Obviously there's the run. That's the best solution. If you can get out of there, get out of there. Hide if you absolutely have to. But then if you're faced with the shooter or you're in the area where you can't do anything, I like the counter idea where it's not, your only option isn't to be a Texan and fight. You have some options where you can kind of run around like a crazy person and make noise and zigzag.
But you're proactive. You're not just sitting there waiting for something inevitable.
Yeah, exactly.
You're taking action.
You're proactive. Yeah, and a couple of the universities have in their videos, they have kids listening to headphones and take out your headphones if you hear something or you see something, and be a little bit more aware. And I think that's a lot of what we're trying to promote on the college campus is awareness of your surroundings. And, if you hear gunshots, that's something you need to be aware of, and that's something you need to act upon. Or if you're getting a message that there's an active shooter or something and you don't hear gunshots, you're probably far away from it, so you need to take a different action and those kinds of things.
I think about this, an active shooter on a college campus, and I think, how in the world do you plan for this event? Because, my world, Mitch's world, primarily exists in government buildings. And so you've got, most of the time they're new buildings, they have multiple exits, they've got security, a lot of times armed security at the gates. But a college campus is wide open, multiple buildings. Mm-hmm. How do you even go about preparing a college campus for an active shooter event?
Yeah, it's so emergency management is a small world, and then higher education emergency management is an even smaller world. And unfortunately, some of my friends in the higher ed emergency management world have had to face these types of incidents, and it is something that's, it's basically our worst nightmare as higher ed emergency managers. But, I think you can look at it in all your phases of emergency management, and you have to. And the first is the prevention piece of it. So there's been a lot of work done since the Virginia Tech shootings in 2007 on behavioral threat assessment and behavioral intervention teams, where you're sort of trying to recognize the threats before they happen. And a lot of times those teams are, they're working on recognizing folks that are threats to themselves, and that's a lot of what they do. But every once in a while they will get someone who they feel might be a threat to someone else or a threat to the greater population. And so I think, having those teams, having them well-trained, getting the right people involved, it's really important. A lot of schools do background checks, not all of them, but that's something you can do as well. I think also providing a reporting mechanism to where if someone knows about someone who is, thinking about these things or planning these things, there's some warning signs that they have a way to report them anonymously. They know the place they can go to talk to someone about it.
Yeah.
And the mental health resources, I've just seen such amazing things in that field as well, in this regard. Just having those resources available before and after these types of incidents is really, really important for both on the student side as well as the faculty and staff side too. So we not only look at the students, but we also are trying to help and then also look and see if there's threats in the faculty and staff population as well. So it's the entire community and visitors too, because like you said, they're open campuses. So.
Jeez. So, are students these days trained in what to do in an active shooter event? Is it mainly focused on faculty and staff training? Is it like, welcome to college, here's your active shooter training?
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. Like with everything, you want to balance it with, welcome to college, you're going to have a great time here, you're going to be safe here. Oh, by the way, active shooter training is right. At 1 o'clock,
It's a tough message.
Yes.
Yeah, you have to, but parents really want to know about it. And I think even more than active shooter, they want to know that their kids are going to be notified when anything bad is happening, and when anything's happening that could cause a threat to them, that they have to take action to protect themselves. So we work a lot, not only on the active shooter training and all that stuff, but more we work on our emergency notification and our crisis communications procedures. And we want to make sure that if something does happen, whether it's an active shooter or not, we can notify them and make sure they know what's happening so that they can take action to protect themselves. And so we put a lot of effort on the preparedness side of things in the emergency notification, procedures, policies, systems, all of that. And parents really want to know about that when they come to campus and bring their kids to campus.
Well, let's talk about that. Two quick stories. One is, a friend of mine was in Paris during the attacks last year, and one of his major things was, I only got informal notifications via Twitter about the locations of the assailants at different points during the night. Like, he never got sort of any official channel notification that he could understand. And the counter to that is that now my parents are subscribed to every New York City notification. And so whenever there's any kind of disaster here, my first call is from my mother being like, "Are you okay?"
Yeah.
And I think if I were a higher ed emergency manager, that would be a really tough balance between me trying to get direct notification to the students, but also this kind of ancillary wave of people 3,000 miles away who suddenly are intensely interested in those 3 square miles. So how do you design a notification paradigm that works successfully in that environment?
The key to that is having multiple modes of notification and educating the community about how and why and when certain modes are going to be used and when the alert system is going to be activated in the first place. So, by law, higher education institutions are required to notify their campus community if there's an immediate threat to life, safety, and health that's occurring on the campus. And there's some fuzzy language in that, and that's the language of the law. There's some fuzziness as far as, well, what exactly is on campus, what exactly is an immediate threat, what is immediate notification, what does that mean? But basically what we boil it down to is we want to get information as quickly as possible to people being affected. And so that means the modes that we use are going to target the people that are immediately affected, and other modes that we use, we can have other people, like people far away and parents, be looking at those. And so so if we're trying to notify our immediate community, we're going to focus on things like text messages and emails, voicemails, things like that are going to get to them immediately, hopefully. We're also going to be updating our website. That's something anyone can go to. We're going to have protections in place so that when millions of people go to it, it doesn't shut down. We're also going to be using our social media feeds so that news media can look at those. Anyone outside of the university community can look at those if we have visitors on campus, those kinds of things. So it's really important to have multimodal and have a lot of tools that you can use to get the information out there. But the other half of it, so half of it is the systems, the policies, the procedures, all of that you have in place for emergency notification. But the other half of it is the education piece for your community. So it's all well and good to be able to send out as many messages as you want as quickly as possible, but if the community doesn't know what to do when they receive those messages, that's a huge problem. So the other half of it is the education and outreach on when you're going to get these, why you're going to get them. If it says this, you need to do this. If you need more information, you go here. If you're a parent, this is what you need to do, things like that. So it's really both of those prongs need to come into play to have a successful program.
And the other interesting thing about this is information is so bad early on in incidents like this. I mean, there was an event last week in the States where the initial reports were there was an active shooter event here, and then it comes to find out, no, it was just someone in a basement saying they heard. I mean, information is all over the place. So, as an emergency manager at a college campus, how do you quickly verify the reports that are coming out and sift through the trash to find what's actually happening?
Yeah, and that's the other thing is that this term active shooter is pretty much media invented. So when you're speaking to law enforcement, it's like, well, what exactly is an active shooter? What are you going to call an active shooter? If there's someone, with a gun that shoots one person, is that an active shooter? If they have to shoot more than 3, and this definition gets a little fuzzy, but I mean, that's where we really rely on our law enforcement. And I know I'll give a shout out to MIT police. They're amazing and they're wonderful and great. So it's really important with the first responders, not only police, but everyone else, to have a really close connection, coordination, communication connection with the rest of the system as far as emergency management and notification. So we're directly tied into them. They can issue notifications if they feel the need, and it's really the first responders. But like you said, like we talked about at the beginning, sometimes these incidents are so quick that you can't even get the notification out before they're over. But it's still important to get the notification out that something's happening because, like I said, even though the actual incident might last, 8 to 12 minutes, the aftermath is going to last a very, very long time. So you want to make sure that you're communicating with your community for long after, immediately as it's happening, and then long after as well to let them know what's going on.
So, I want to move to those kind of organizational things in a second, but I guess I want to spend just a minute to talk about notification to people with special needs or disabilities or functional needs. And because, I feel like this is sort of a massive challenge for these things. And I've seen things like vibrating alert systems and other kinds of alternative notification. Is that something that you've worked on at MIT, or have you seen successful strategies to reach these people that aren't as easy to reach by traditional methods?
Yeah, that is something we're looking at actually improving a little bit at MIT, and I think everywhere. We really want to make sure that our entire population is notified, and we try to do audio and visual alerts in different ways. We have boards. They're called video boards on the campus, so they'll show up visually, and then we try to do different audible ones as well. So we're trying to make sure that we're communicating with our entire community. I think another important way to do that, and this is a little bit easier on a college campus because we're usually very tight knit, but it's really important to make sure that when you boil down into the different labs or offices or centers or departments, that you all know if there is someone who has access and functional needs, and that they may not be getting the alert as immediately, or if they need to get it in a different way or a special way, that you are working with your immediate community to make sure everyone is okay. So we're also trying to promote that as well. But I think the alerting is a challenge with the access and functional needs, but it's definitely something that's top of our priority list at all of the campuses that I've worked with, and all of my colleagues that I've worked with. We definitely think about that as part of the program.
Well, so let's zoom out for a second. I'm going to play, actually, I think, zoom out music. You ready? This is my zoom out music. So we're zooming out right now. Here we go.
It's funny because your zoom out music is the same music we play in every podcast.
I know, but
I was expecting something special.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, it's still great music.
I couldn't design a new sound cue. But so let's take this focus for a second. So you're an emergency manager at a university. You're not focused on security, but you are focused on all these other services. Something like this happens. What are the first objectives that you're thinking about, other than notification? What are the things that you're going to stand up knowing what's going down?
Okay, so I think just like in any big situation, we're going to stand up our emergency management system as far as our emergency operations center, getting all of our people involved. Obviously, law enforcement and first responders are still going to be dealing with a lot of what's happening at the scene and things like that. But it's really important to get a good team and incident management system in place immediately, because, like I said, it's going to last for a long time. And unfortunately, some of the places that these types of things have happened to, they might be smaller places with less resources, so they don't necessarily have, incident command system or people trained in that kind of thing. But a lot of really amazing things have happened when these types of things happen. There's a lot of outreach and help. And so, for example, when the Umpqua Community College incident happened, University of Oregon was right there to help them, and they have an amazing, tremendous system with Andre Leduc leads it there, and he brought a whole incident management team down there to help them, and so there's a lot of camaraderie and help in that regard. But so it's really important to have that whole incident management system in place, and your EOC and everything else. Immediately, if you're talking about really any location that this happens to, you're going to get a lot of family members, whether it's parents or other family members, spouses, kids, wanting to know if their person that is associated with that institution or office or whatever it is okay. So having the communication in place for that, and where those people can go either to get communication or if they can actually go to a physical place for reunification, is really, really important. So that's something to set up, whether you have a call center, like I said, a reunification center, something like that. That's something you're going to have to look into right in the immediate aftermath of it. And I think one of the most important things in the immediate aftermath is getting the mental health folks on board. And that almost becomes an operation in itself. Of course, it's going to be coordinated with everything you have going on in your emergency operations center and with your first responders, but it becomes kind of its own animal, because when something like this happens, it's such a heavy thing on your entire community and it definitely brings people together, but everyone is so in shock and needing support. So that effort has to be ramped up immediately, and that's one of the things that stays activated for the longest, it seems, from what I've seen in folks that have experienced this. And I'll put a disclaimer out there, I've never been part of this, thank goodness. But just the colleges and universities that I've worked at that have experienced it, it seems like that lasts for a very long time.
So how do you...
I think... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, so for me, you're saying that, and I'm reflecting back kind of psychological first aid. I mean, that's the tactic I've heard. And one of the problems that I've heard that organizations have is this idea of needing to surge it so quickly. Like, it does start, it lasts a long time, and suddenly instead of, 4 or 5 counselors on site, you need, dozens and dozens of folks trained with this expertise. So have you heard of strategies people use to scale up in this way? Do they train new folks? Do they EMAC people in from other jurisdictions? How do they surge up?
Yes, exactly. They have to surge up. Again, it's one of the biggest pieces of the aftermath is mental health response. So whether they can get counterparts in the local jurisdiction, I guess I'm speaking from a higher ed perspective, but if you can get counterparts from the local jurisdiction to help, if you can get neighboring colleges and schools, I worked with a lot of university systems, and so they've relied on each other to kind of bring other counterparts in from the other universities that they're part of the same system, which is very easy to do because they're part of the same system. It gets a little bit more complicated if you're trying to bring in people that you don't know if they're specifically trained to higher education or whatever specific environment you're working in. I like how you just threw the EMAC out there. So colleges and universities don't really fall into the EMAC structure, but we're working on that, and we're trying to form teams that can come and share resources between universities. So we are working on that. But yeah, they definitely have to ramp that up, and the internal resources become exhausted pretty quickly. And I've seen all of them do just such amazing things, the internal resources, but of course they need to rest and they get burnt out. So they need to get other resources in. So yeah, you have to go outside in whatever way you can, whether it's another university or your local jurisdiction or the state or whatever you can do there.
I think that's a great point to remember and reiterate, is that psychological first aid is needed pretty much immediately. I know psychological first aid has been around a while, at least 15 years or so, probably longer, but I don't know if it's often still thought of one of the things you need to bring in immediately. I mean, I think people still go to their immediate, like law enforcement, EMS, but it's a good point to remember that psychological first aid is needed immediately, and different than the other disciplines, it's needed continuously and then long term.
Yeah, so one of the other things that I've seen a lot of the, at least the higher education institutions who have experienced these things, what I've seen happen with them also is that in the immediate days after something like this, the community is really seeking a way to get together. So they transfer from dealing with this incident and the response to this actual incident to planning a large-scale event. So if you can picture that, like you're dealing with an emergency, an actual emergency is happening, and then all of a sudden you have to transfer into planning and managing this huge, large-scale event that's probably going to have dignitaries. It's going to have massive media from all across the country, and that's something we haven't even touched on yet, but that'll be all over your area, media, national media and everything. Thousands and thousands of people coming together. So that's something else that I've seen them have to focus on, is planning this large event, which is part of the, mental health aspect, because you want to bring your community together and you want to have a gathering, you want to have remembrances and things of that nature and have everyone come together, because that's part of the healing. And so in the immediate aftermath, that happens. And then, like you mentioned, Andrew, it also goes on. It goes on to the 1-year anniversary and the next year's anniversary, and then 10 years. And, it just keeps going on, and you have to handle it very carefully and, very gently. And are you going to have a memorial permanently on your campus or permanently in your office or whatever it is? And how are you going to handle that as the years go on? Because the folks that have experienced it and are going to still be there are going to hold it heavy forever. I mean, they're really going to have it with them forever. So it becomes a part of the fabric of wherever you are, and you have to make sure that as part of your emergency management process, you're thinking about that and you're handling that and you're planning for it.
I've never thought before about the long tail these things have.
Right.
And as an emergency manager, having to sort of manage the immediate aftermath of this, and as you said, setting up facts and working in psychological first aid, and then immediately your incident command system is pivoting to event planning for all of this stuff, and the logistics of where the media is, where the staging areas go, how you do dignitary protection and all that stuff. I mean, it seems like you're making people who are in trauma like immediately push themselves beyond what they're capable of. I mean, do people, are emergency managers able to handle this? Do they have to kind of step off and rotate out and do their own kind of mental health management?
I think so, and I think not just the emergency management, but the first responders. I mean, like I said, this affects everyone so deeply, so you have to really, and I think in this stage, you're just going from what I've observed, and then there is a point where it kind of calms down a little bit, and then you kind of have a little breaking point. But, you know, I think that lasts for a really long time, too. So I've gone into universities who have experienced these types of incidents and done after-action reviews, and it's very, very different from the type of after-action review you do for, like, a hurricane or a tornado or something like that. It's even in months afterwards, it's very, very raw. It's the after action can't be, okay, what do you need to do better? It has to be, let's talk about it in a more gentle way, and let's really talk about the positives and focus on that. And a lot of the after action is really meeting with people and having them just vent and explain their experience, because explaining their experience is part of their healing process, and just talking about, you know, how it went for them. And from there you can glean areas where they maybe could have improved or whatever it is, but just letting them all gather together and then also talk individually, I think for the emergency management side of things is really beneficial. So you wouldn't think, you know, it's a little bit almost heartless to say, well, we need to have an after action, but it's also, I think, part of the healing process to get everyone back together in a few months' time and talk about it and, you know, talk about the successes especially and celebrate those, and then have everyone tell their individual stories as a group and then alone as well. I think that's a really big part of the healing process.
That's really interesting. So the after action becomes more of a group therapy session than a traditional after action hot wash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think also they're very willing to express, you know, what they could have done better, because there is nothing like this type of situation to really test your plans and procedures. And so, of course, there's going to be things that come out of them that, you know, need to be improved or could be done better or in a different way.
That's one of the things actually I admire the most about the San Bernardino response, is that from the outside it seemed to go so well, and even a couple of weeks ago they were the police officers there were sort of listing their own ways they could have improved. I mean, they did it publicly. It was in the Los Angeles Times. I mean, I think you're right that people feel this sort of moral imperative to instruct other people to do it better, so fewer lives are lost.
Yeah, and the San Bernardino response, I think a really big takeaway from that is the leadership that was involved, especially with the chief of police and others. And I think in these types of situations, that's so important that you have really strong leadership and a face that goes with that leadership, because this is going to be a time where a lot of people who have been affected are going to feel very lost. And as a community, you're going to feel very lost. So really having that strong leadership in place. And with my training partners and I at Wood O'Brien's, we did a lot of training with policy groups, not only on active shooter incidents, but that was always one of the scenarios we would bring up with the policy group, because it is so important to have a really strong policy group, so that, and when I say that, I mean, you know, the senior leadership or senior management of whatever organization you're working with, because in situations like this, you really are going to have that strong leadership team, and the rest of the community is going to look to the strong leadership team as far as how to move forward and how to heal. And, you know, the one positive thing I think from these incidents is that the communities come together so much, and they become, you know, of course, stronger than they were before, and really much more of a community. And I always talk about, you know, reputation management after disasters, and especially at higher education institutions. You know, you want to retain revenue, you want to make sure your business processes are ongoing, but it doesn't seem to be as much of a problem with these types of incidents, because the community comes together so much, and they become so much more close-knit. And I think a lot of that has to do with that leadership, and that's why it's so important to have that ahead of time, have that policy group train together and know their role and know the leadership side of things, especially with these types of sensitive incidents.
I wanted to touch on one other thing, which I think is one of the most difficult parts of this. We've mentioned FACTS a couple times. So for people, because we're all acronym heavy, we love to shoot out. Family assistance centers are places family members go to locate their loved ones and figure out if they're among the casualties. And this is where we deal with this issue of family reunification. And I wonder if you could talk some about some of the difficulties in managing that, especially in a higher education setting where maybe you have parents coming, you have some people who may be minors who are on site, and there may be other sort of legal things you do for reunification. What do you think are the major things that emergency managers have to think about when they're dealing with that issue?
I think that probably at a college campus, one of the number one things we do is we tell the students that they really need to get in touch with their parents, which is not always something they want to do. So that is it's a really important piece to have both lines of communication going back and forth. Yeah. So we want to make sure that they reach out to their families and also faculty and staff, please reach out to your families, tell them you're okay so that we don't have people fleeing here. But you are going to have a lot of people coming to whatever area it is. We saw that in San Bernardino. We've seen it in a lot of these other incidents. So in that case, it's very, very important to have an organized way to do that, have the right people there to manage that. So you don't necessarily want the really stark people, business as usual types. You want the more touchy-feely, we want to make sure you're getting the information that you need, that they have a way of getting that information, that the location where you're doing that is completely separated from where you have your media staging area, because mixing those two is going to be a little bit of a problem, and you don't want that to happen. And that's a huge effort in itself that you're going to have to be dealing with in these types of situations. And I don't, in my experience, I don't know that there's a perfect way to do it. So if you guys have ideas, let us know. But I think that it is a really important piece of it, just to make sure that there is one place they can go, they're getting the right information they need, you're putting the right staff there to deal with them in a nice, gentle way, and making sure that they can get the information that they need as soon as they can get it. And then also that two-way communication street where you're telling the folks that are part of your community to reach out to their family members and let them know that they're okay.
So if people, if there's emergency managers listening that have been asked, we need an active shooter plan for our building, for our campus, for our agency, where do people go to get more information about active shooters planning?
Well, you can go to the two things we talked about. You can go to the Run, Hide, Fight, or you can go to Alice for the actual, what do you do if you're faced with an active shooter? I think that report you talked about is really telling as well. There are some good websites, actually, from the government side of things that folks can go to. So there's a DHS active shooter preparedness website that I think is good. It has resources for law enforcement personnel and trainers, but there's some additional things as well. There's an FBI active shooter website, and then there's a Department of Labor workplace violence. Those are kind of more generalized. If you're specifically higher education, there's a lot of specific stuff out there at the different universities and colleges that have experienced this and have been doing a lot of work on it. So, but I would say in general, if you don't know where to go exactly, start with your local law enforcement, whether that's on your campus or the jurisdiction that your office is located in. And it's been really amazing to see the kinds of training that law enforcement has done over the years and the kinds of tactics that they've come up with to deal with this type of situation. So they're really the experts on this, and they can kind of tell you, at least from their perspective, what you can do as someone if you're in that situation, and then what they're going to do. I think it's equally as important for us to know what law enforcement is going to do in these types of situations, because if you're a victim, they're not going to stop and take care of you, for example. Their first priority is to neutralize the active shooter. So they might, be passing people by who need help. And we need to know that as people that might be affected, because that's their first priority. So I think interacting with law enforcement is really important wherever you are. And then you can go from there as far as the planning and the preparedness and all of that.
Well, it's an interesting topic. It's unfortunately more and more in the news, and I think going to be kind of something emergency managers have to deal with. But thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Can you stay with us for a little bit longer and talk about something?
Yeah, maybe we can talk about something more fun besides active shooters. I hate that this is what brought us together after not seeing each other for 9 years.
I know,
active shooter for
active shooters
bringing people together around the world.
But it's important, so yeah.
What actually really sucks is the more fun thing we're going to talk about for a minute is the Zika virus.
Oh, yes, excellent. Hooray.
That's how our show rolls, really.
Yeah.
More problems, more fun. Is that?
Yeah, more problems, more fun.
I don't know that any of us are really good. And, we're going to devote a show to this sometime between now and mosquito season. That's going to happen.
Yeah, that's good.
But we wanted to tease it a little bit. I mean, because this is a massive public health threat that's happened. And I think it's one where, I think we were able to do a really great scientific breakdown of Ebola. We were able to talk about some other kind of public health threats about pandemic. But Zika, there's just so little that science, it's like every day you're like, oh, it's an STD now,
Right. Oh, you might be able to get it from kissing.
Right.
Oh.
Wait, don't go that far.
That's why I don't want you kissing me all the time.
Oh, right. I got to slow that down. But also just the fact that we heard about it in Brazil, then there were sort of suddenly thousands of reports of birth defects. Then suddenly it's in Haiti, it's in Puerto Rico. I mean, it's all around South America.
The mosquitoes that carry it are already in South Florida and like parts of
up to southern Virginia, all your favorite places in Texas. So I don't know. Is this something, Suzanne, since you're on, that you guys are thinking about at MIT too?
Yeah, we are, because we have people traveling all over the world. I mean, literally all over the world. So any type of illness or disease or security threat in any of the countries that we have folks in, we really pay attention to. So we're trying to learn more about it. Our MIT health folks are really on it, and they're giving us information sheets about it. And I think we're just trying to educate people about it and make sure they know, and especially if they're the women who are in the age where they might consider pregnancy in the next few years. That's really the risky population now. So that's who we're really trying to reach as far as any travelers that we have.
I feel like MIT should be able to build some sort of robot that kills the mosquitoes. I'm kind of disappointed you didn't lead with that.
We'll work on that.
This is actually one of the debates we've been having is about CRISPR, right, which is this new genetic engineering technology. And so there are prototype ways that they can actually genetically engineer mosquitoes so that they can't have larvae, so that all the mosquitoes will die off.
I feel like this is like a slippery slope to like extinction of the human race.
Of everything. Right. We said,
no, it's cool, guys. We're just going to genetically modify the mosquito.
And then somebody's bitten by a genetically modified mosquito, and then they get mosquito powers, and then people start dying off all over. I mean, it's a scary thing. But like, I've literally been having these conversations with other emergency managers where they're like, well, there's no real use for the mosquitoes. Let's just get rid of all of them.
And how far away is the vaccine from being... I mean, isn't it still, they're talking like a year at least, 2 years?
In terms of production cycles, that's what I've been hearing. It's luckily not, because it's so close to yellow fever, it is something that it's not going to be that hard, kind of air quotes, to develop it. But the ramp up for production timeline is going to be more of an issue.
Similar to active shooters, this disease also has that emotional aspect to it. I feel like more than some of the other traditional disasters, because the babies.
It's terrible.
Babies, I know.
So heartbreaking.
People just hyperventilate. I mean, because having kids, right?
Yeah.
You imagine
you immediately
this idea,
and
it's terrifying. I don't know. I mean, I feel like this is bringing me down.
I know.
Actually, this may not be a step up from active shooter.
Let's go back to active shooters. Something cheerful.
No, gosh.
But anyway, we are gonna. If you have questions about Zika, write us or call us. We'll give the shout out info at the end of the show, and we'll make sure that we hit those and try and get some medical folks on to kind of talk that stuff through. I'm trying to think of something more optimistic to close with.
We fixed our voicemail. That's kind of cool.
Oh, yeah, we finally figured out our voicemail.
So we were like, why isn't anybody leaving us voicemails? And then we realized we didn't have an outgoing message that we thought we did. So we have a voicemail. The purpose of the voicemail is to call us and give us suggestions for what you want to hear, to ask us questions, to give us feedback about what you don't like. And that number is 859-429-2731. That number again, 859-429-2731.
And you can also just tweet us a question at Hazards Podcast, at Hazards Podcast. Then you don't even have to talk to us.
Yeah, you can just tweet us weird things.
Like the way I order food. Actually, I have an Amazon Echo. Do you know these?
Yeah.
And so now apparently you can order Domino's via the Amazon. You can just be like, order Domino's.
Oh, that's
and
dangerous.
I know. I can just imagine pizza showing up all the time without meaning to.
So, Susie, if people want to call you and talk to you, no. If people want, what's your phone number? Can we use your phone? No. If people want to connect with you or ask you questions, do you have I don't know, LinkedIn, Twitter? What's the deal?
Yeah, I have in the past kept my Facebook and Twitter more on my personal stuff. So I'm not as good as you guys are, like the Twitter and all that. With
Sure.
But
few are.
Nobody is.
But yeah, if people want to contact me, they should be able to find me on the MIT website or also on the Widow Bryant's website. I still do a little bit of work with them. So they should be able to contact me there or through you guys. And I can give you my email and stuff to put on your website if you'd like. And yes, I would love to talk to anyone who wants to talk about this, who wants to argue with any points I made. Obviously, there's a lot of room for discussion in all of this. So I look forward to hearing from anyone who wants to reach out.
So, quick James Lee Witt story. This was 2001. I'm working in Mitch
Just a little name dropping.
Well, yeah. I'm working in the Washington, D.C. Emergency Operations Center, and I feel this presence behind me, and you just you're like, why is everybody it just got tense in the room. I turn around and I see James Lee Witt sauntering across the EOC.
Oh gosh.
And he's got the most beautiful eyes, and he's
most beautiful eyes. I know, gosh. I'm tongue-tied around him.
There's an aura about him. So shout out to my boy James Lee Witt. I didn't talk to him. I think I cried maybe as he walked by.
A little tear ran down your face.
He patted my head.
So we're going to close actually with a special segment that Andrew and I recorded. Unfortunately, Suzanne, you weren't around for this one. At the New York State Library Association conference last year, which is, one thing about active shooter. And I think I totally agree with you. We need to find a better name for these things, right? Because we can't really call it mass casualty. Active shooter isn't right. So whatever the name of that event is, just like that, it turns out that libraries are one of the forefronts for emergency management thinking and some of the really good stuff that's going on with that. So, check it out now. So Andrew and I are here with Tom Nielsen from the Metropolitan New York Library Council and Cindy Albertson, who is from Alliance for Response. And we're actually at a conference, the Special Library Associations of New York conference, right? And I don't know why they invited us.
And that's what we're going to find out. So it's not an emergency management conference, it's a libraries conference. And so my first question to Tom is, why are we here? Where is the connection?
In an existential sense. Talk about God.
Why is it important for information scientists or librarians to connect with emergency managers and those that work in kind of disaster response and planning?
Yeah, I think that with librarians and information professionals, it's not something that we think about enough, emergency management. So having a session here at this conference, which is generally for special librarians who are mostly librarians and information professionals that work in private corporate environments, sometimes nonprofits, they don't often think about this or are not necessarily tasked with finding information about emergency management because their company is a bank or an insurance company or like me, an engineering firm I used to be in. So it's more about these other core subject areas. So emergency management is kind of tangential a lot of times. So having something here gives them the sense of, well, this is something that they could take on and add value as a part of what the information center provides people in their corporation or their company.
Yeah, and what I was amazed with today during some of the presentations was the parallels between emergency management and the similar language that's used in our industry and librarians planning, preparedness,
competitive intelligence,
collaboration, the importance of sharing information. I mean, that is all things that are vital to emergency response.
Which, and it's fascinating because I think you can say about a lot of industries, they don't think enough about emergency planning, right? I mean, but libraries in particular have this really special core value, because one thing that emergencies do poorly is process information. We never can process enough information. And if there were a way to leverage this capacity of special libraries to that end, I feel like that would be a really helpful thing. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Unfortunately, what librarians are often doing is finding relevance for themselves, because especially with special libraries, companies will downsize and easily get rid of the library because it's not a profit center. We're a cost center. But the way that we combat that is by coming up with new and proactive things that we could take on that nobody else is, that has value for the company. Like if nobody's really focused on emergency preparedness, either on a corporate or a personal level, and the library can do that, that's going to be helpful no matter what. And especially if, like, the blackout of 2003, everybody was just like streaming out of my building. It's like, okay, so we're just let go. Well, maybe we could have provided something for people. What can they do? Where can they go? Right. What's going to happen?
I think we've got a real value added for libraries right here. So special libraries of the world, here's a great new value added for you. And one real success story, I think, is Cindy Albertson's story about Alliance for Response and what you guys did after Sandy, which I know isn't library specific, but really does speak to kind of cultural heritage and the sort of importance of saving these things after disaster. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what happened.
Sure. Alliance for Response was a facilities group that was started in 2004, and by 2005 it partnered with Heritage Preservation to become Alliance for Response. And only this past year we started calling ourselves Alliance for Response New York City, because there are other organizations in other cities. There's an Alliance for Response in Miami, there's one in Philadelphia. They're much smaller organizations, but there's several throughout the United States. After Hurricane Sandy, Alliance for Response was essentially just a network. It was an email list and a phone tree of different organizations around the city, different cultural institutions that got together a couple times a year to talk about emergency preparedness or business continuity. But during Hurricane Sandy, we were sort of activated. We were called upon by our sister institutions. I was working at MoMA at the time. My partner worked at the Museum of Natural History, and we had a colleague who literally was texting us, SOS, need help at the Noguchi Museum. And this is, the Tuesday after the storm, like the streets in Astoria were still kind of flooded, and we're like, let's get some stuff in the car and let's just get over there and help. So we went from a group that just sort of shared information and, met a couple times, to a group that put our hands on collections. So we essentially started forming New York City's own emergency response team, Heritage Emergency Response Team, the day after Sandy.
So what is it that's so important about it? I mean, I was hearing in the session people were talking about like the sense of loss that disasters bring when why do you think it's so important to sort of preserve these items of art or from companies?
Well, I mean, it's when something terrible happens, when somebody loses somebody or somebody loses their home, you see it on the news all the time. If there's a fire, I don't want to use international examples right now because we would be sitting here all day, but you see somebody bend down to pick up a photograph or a book or to try to find something that's left after a disaster. So I think if you think about it in terms of sort of individuals and families and like individual artists, the things that are the reflections of people's lives, that's what they want after something horrible happens. And I think the same can be said for all cultural collections in libraries, just on a much larger scale.
Yeah. So how do emergency managers get more involved with both of your organizations if they want more information or if they want to volunteer? How would they?
You're letting them do a plug and a shout out and everything. All right.
To our massive listener base.
That's right.
I'll go first. Please go to www.afrnyc.org and join our membership list. Right now, it's sort of just a newsletter or a blog blast, but within the next month, we're going to have a proper membership portal set up where people can log in and literally say, this is my location, this is how many objects I have, this is my disaster plan, and you'll be able to upload your own information, and it can be your own disaster plan center, basically.
Wow, that's great.
So Metro is a little bit different. We're a member organization as well, but our members are mostly libraries and archives. So we provide services for them, and our website is metro.org, pretty simple. And you can find out more about Metro. But one of the things that we do is we do provide workshops for librarians and archivists. And we would love to have you guys back at Metro even to do more on this topic. That would be great for all types of librarians.
Very cool.
Absolutely. And we spend a lot of time on this show talking about this phenomenon of groups that aren't really disaster focused, right? That have other needs, that when a disaster happens, they step up and they become networks. And I think that this is a great thing for libraries to do. And I think it's a great thing that Alliance for Response has really done. You've really taken that energy, and over the course of several years, you've built it into a real organization. And it's really impressive.
Yeah. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Tommy, you screwed it up.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in this episode.
Yeah, this has been a good one. A long one, but a good one. Longy, but a goodie.
Sometimes you got to go epic, just like Adele. You got to leave it all in the podcast.
Bring it back to Adele. Well, it's good to be back. We're going to try to be back on somewhat of a schedule now.
Yeah, we keep saying that. So people out there are like, right, yeah, guys.
To our credit, we did have several disasters in the New York City area.
They
we
really
had
just keep happening.
sick kids. We had
They're
Star
really-
Wars: The Force Awakens.
That's right. That was the biggest disaster of all.
Yeah.
They're going to keep happening. It's not our life now, and I think this is true for a lot of emergency managers, is like constant activation.
Yeah.
6 or 7 years ago, it was rare, and now I think everybody's spending more time being activated than not, almost.
Yeah, and I think you also have like political people in your organizations that are more interested in disasters now, where I feel like back in the day they were kind of hands off and let law enforcement, emergency management handle it. Now they want to be intimately involved in everything,
Which is good, right?
Yeah.
It's good to get that profile up. It's good
Right.
people are seeing the gospel of ICS.
Absolutely.
But it wears you down.
Yep. But we'll be back.
On that note, thanks everybody. Drop us a line and we will be talking to you.
Peace.
Next episode, we should try and make cray cray happen. Just